doing is great, but it doesn't solve or close the loophole. So what we try to do is to say, what's the conduct we want to prevent from occurring? That conduct is, as we tried to say, the use of our facilities by non-resident pilots who are invitees of somebody who might have a legal right to be here. The Eagle Sport, assuming their lease was valid, under the rules that we have found, the covenants say, yes, they could conceptually lease with the concept to have a club. But they can't then, as a tenant, under a valid lease, turn around and invite people under their lease to come and use the airport. That's a loophole that they sought to use, and in fact successfully did use. They don't have the right to do that. It's precluded. It's precluded specifically in the 1991 resolutions adopted by Spruce Creek Board. And the board went on to adopt definitions. Adopt definitions that prescribe who is an invitee. What is a tenant allowed to do? Commercial tenant, for example. And I'm not talking about commercial tenants that are covered like the downwind. Downwind's allowed by our covenants restrictions to make an invitation to guests to come and eat and leave. The Flying Club concept is, we have airplanes here, I can have 1,000 members, and you got the keys to that plane. You come here anytime you want. You could fly all day and fly all night. So what we try to do with the proposed resolution is not get sucked into defining a flying club. Let's just close the loophole. There should be no non-resident invitee of anybody with unlimited use of our airport facilities. And if you think about that, it's quite simple. And I think that when the AAC comes back with their recommendations on flying clubs, that's independent, and I welcome that. And we should welcome that because it's going to further define whatever they want to do with a flying club. But a flying club, super definition, doesn't solve the problem. The loophole still exists. You have to close the loophole. So there's a back door into every computer software program. We're trying to close that back door. That's what this is designed to do. And I'll admit that people wanted to see something different in the language. You know, let's have a simple language that flying clubs are prohibited. That's not the goal. And we also don't think that prohibiting flying clubs would be legal. But shutting down the back door and abiding by the covenants and restrictions that are already in place that precludes that. For example, under the 1991 resolutions, Eagle would have had to have submitted their lease to the board for review, named any pilot that they wanted to invite, and we would be able to scrutinize that. Well, none of that was done, of course. And we knew that was happening. And I was concerned every day that that happened as potential exposure to our community. We don't know who was flying the planes, how they were maintained, what quality of pilots there were. And, you know, we've had a tragic experience here not too many months ago where sometimes I think, do we learn from our mistakes? What have we done to preclude that from happening again? So this resolution, and what we did with the resolution was incorporate background. And so it's difficult reading, perhaps for some, but the resolution itself is only 4 or 5 points. It discusses what our intention is, what our rules are intended to do. And that is to preclude the unrestricted use of our private airport by non-Spruce Creek members, non-resident pilots. If you're not a member, if you're not a homeowner, you're not a resident pilot, you shouldn't be here. Now, we have to provide notice to a violator that this happened. We've discussed here in the past the consequences of selective enforcement. We want to draw a line in the sand. We can't let the most recent violator, who just happened to be escorted out by the landlord, not by the board, not by management, not by security. I mean, they could come back. They have no notice from us. Matter of fact, they haven't even graced us with their appearance. They've never been here. They never came here and presented their case to the board. They never came when they asked permission to solicit members at a function, at a party on our property. It was a self-serving measure for them to say, I don't even have to show up. Just, put it on the agenda and we'll have a big barbecue and we'll get 100 members more. And quite unbelievable in my opinion. And so it provides for notice to them, even though they're gone. They were in violation. They need to know that, and we need to draw that line so future potential violators will know. If you don't have enforcement of some sort, then our rules and regulations are meaningless. And we can stand and talk about it at lunch and in the corners, but the board needs to act. And the board needs to act now. We don't need to wait another month, then the holidays, and then elections, and then next year, and then God forbid there's an accident because we didn't do anything. People are going to go, well, why didn't you do something? Maybe somebody's going to hire some clever lawyer to say, well, you knew about this in September. What did you guys do about it? Why is this non-resident pilot here? And I understand enforcement, as Joe's pointed out, you can't enforce every landing and every takeoff. But we have to do something, and by doing something, we set a standard of safety, importance to the community, and protecting our private airport. So there's a due process clause in here that says, hopefully after the board votes on this, we let Eagle know. Let them have a copy. Give security a copy. And let Eagle know that they're not allowed in here because they didn't submit their lease for approval. They didn't tell us what they were going to be doing, which is required under our covenants and restrictions as an invitee of a commercial tenant. And so, if you look at the nuances of closing the back door forever versus fighting over the definition of flying clubs, and flying clubs may not, the definition that AAC is coming out with flying clubs may not address some of these situations. Suppose 3 people just rented a hangar and bought an airplane and invited all their friends to fly. They're not a flying club, they're just buddies. Suppose an association bought an airplane and didn't call itself a flying club. Well, under this resolution, it prevents all of that from happening because it addresses the conduct, the illegal and unauthorized conduct at our airport. It's as simple as that. And so, I'm hoping that the board will consider the resolutions. It's on the agenda. I don't think that it precludes us from adopting whatever AAC comes out with in the future in a separate resolution and adopting those restrictions or definitions or rules and regulations pertaining to flying clubs. That's great. But what I try to do here is to stop the conduct of the pilots no matter how they get here. I don't care if they're in a flying club or a group of 3 or guys that rent a hangar and give their keys out to other people. What happens if someone comes here as a tenant, a corporate tenant, a legitimate commercial tenant, and starts issuing shares of stock? Well, I'm a tenant, I got a valid lease, I'm going to issue 1,000 shares of stock to anybody who wants to come and fly this airplane. But we're not a club, you're just members, you're shareholders of my company. This resolution covers that.
Jack, are you prepared to make a motion?
I will be, about 10 seconds. So with that background, I move that the board adopt the resolution that we have proposed as written.
Do we have a second?
I second the motion.
Thank you for your attention, by the way. Sorry it took so long.
In a few less words, let me read the resolution, which none of you have. 2 paragraphs worth. It is the intention of the POA covenants, restrictions, and regulations not to authorize the unrestricted use of our airport and its facilities for non-Spruce Creek members, non-resident pilots. Paragraph 1. It is the intention of the POA covenants, restrictions, and regulations to preclude non-resident tenants from granting non-resident member guests and/or invitees unconditional, unlimited access of the use of Spruce Creek Airport runways, taxiways, and facilities. That's the bulk of it. There's another paragraph talking about Eagle Sport Club and such, putting them on notice from before. But that is the issue that's before us right now, those two paragraphs primarily. We're not defining a flying club. We could have a flying club within Spruce Creek of resident members, and it's quite fine, it's quite legal. That's not the problem here. The only problem we had with this whole issue was outside residents using our facilities without our knowledge. Period. And that's all this is intended to stop.
Jack, you indicate that this document from 1991 was incorporated into our CNRs?
Yes.
Paul, the resolution in the background talks about the FISC covenants and restrictions and definition of easements and enjoyment. That's certainly incorporated into our current regulations, covenants, and the articles and amendments to our articles that have gone on since 1991, since the adoption of that, have all incorporated all previous rules, regulations, etc., from the founders into the current and existing articles of incorporation, bylaws, and covenants. And I brought the two cases with me, Paul, in case you had asked for that. And the judge in the Stanley case, who I think is the same judge, Michael Orfinger, on October 4th, 2016, in his opinion, goes through the litany of how all of those rules, regulations, covenants, and restrictions of the early founders are still adopted and reaffirmed, as they did in the Travolta case, which you know was back in 1993, after the POA was formed. It's quite clear that all of the previous rules, regulations, covenants, and restrictions that were adopted by the predecessors to us Spruce Creek POA are binding upon us now.
I'm not disputing that. My question was about Exhibit A that you have attached to your resolution.
Exhibit A is, as you know, a copy of the resolution certified by the board secretary at the time.
A title search was done in August 2016 by Brooks Casey's law office of Wright and Casey. This had to do with a search on the lot that the country club sold, and it's a standard title search, and it goes through all of the amendments that are on our declarations for purposes of ensuring that the lot is attached to those guiding documents, and they indicate that is not there. Rules and regulations, obviously, oftentimes are not incorporated into our CNRs. They act as a rule and a regulation based on board-level decision-making that can come and go with different boards. It can come and go from one month to the next month. So it's entirely possible that it's not part of our CNRs and is just a board rule or a board policy. So consequently, Exhibit A has a lot of detail, in my view, that is quite good. I think there is some merit to a lot of what it has to offer, but there is, but to say that it's incorporated in our CNRs is not accurate.
So this is now, Paul, your legal opinion on this issue, correct? So the record is very clear what's going on here. It's your intention to attack the proposed resolution on your belief, which differs from the judges in both the Travolta case and the Stanley case, that the prior rules, covenants, and restrictions adopted by the board have no effect. Is that your position?
No, that's not my position.
Because that's what you're saying.
No, Jack.
That's what you're saying here, on the record, before these folks.
No, I'm just trying to tell you what Brooks Casey
You're trying to tell me what? Brooks Casey is here with a memo so we could read that memo? Do you have something for us to read that says that those rules and regulations aren't in effect?
He said it's not part of the declarations.
Are they in effect because they were adopted by subsequent articles of amendment and articles of incorporation?
They were not incorporated as an amendment. Now, I'm not arguing.
If that was the case, then it would have been nice to have Brooks Casey either here so the folks could hear this and I could ask him some questions, or you presented that to us not on the day of the resolution proposal at a meeting of the board. So to have something in your hand, this, the reason why I'm a little upset is because This matter was submitted to Legal and Bylaws 3 weeks ago. Legal and Bylaws gave it their blessing, and it was circulated to the board and the president. And at no time was there any objection to anything that was proposed. So to come tonight with an objection that can't be challenged is just bothersome.
Okay, I'm not done. I have some other questions as well. We don't have AAC review on this, primarily because the AAC were starting to get balled up a little bit with exactly what Jack was trying to vet out in this document. It seemed logical that the AAC should have some amount of oversight, or at least be included in this process. We mentioned that at the last meeting. It was part of our meeting minutes that the AAC be involved in this. But the fact is that there is a great deal of research that goes into our declarations and our CNRs and our guiding documents and our rules and regulations and all of that stuff that they, quite frankly, don't have access to. And so going to Legal and Bylaws for that kind of information was entirely appropriate. Consequently, I asked them to review flying clubs and flight schools as a separate issue that could be merged perhaps with what Jack's proposal was saying here. I still believe that's the wisest choice. But unfortunately, the AAC was not able to finish up on their portion of what we had wanted to have at this meeting this evening. I believe there's merit to a lot of what is in here. I do not believe it is finished. This document and the resolution does not address non-resident commercial tenants. We have the cafe owner, not the cafe owner, the owner of the cafe business, non-resident commercial tenant advertising to outside for use of our airport in order to come to his place of business. We have Daytona Aircraft Services, non-resident commercial business advertising outside to bring aircraft in here for maintenance or avionics reasons. This is, Bill O'Brien is in the same boat. So we have several groups here that are conducting business that are not addressed by Exhibit A or by this particular resolution. I think they should be, and I think the resolution could be written sufficiently enough to cover that aspect of the operations that exist here today. But it is an open piece, I think, that does need to be addressed before we vote on this particular resolution.
Well, I'd just like to respond briefly. They're not mentioned because they're not covered. There's no need for a commercial tenant like the Downwind to be covered because it doesn't extend piloting privileges to people like the Flying Club did. Those folks come in here for a specific purpose, which is, by the way, set forth in the attachment A, under rights to use Spruce Creek Airport, under Article 2, which talks about invitations of commercial members. Commercial members may extend invitations to their clients and prospective guests.
That's a commercial member. That is not a commercial tenant.
Okay.
That is a non-member.
And the intent of that is to allow them to come for a specific purpose, to come and eat. This resolution is only pertaining to non-Spruce Creek pilots from using our airport. And I don't understand why you're trying to cloud the issue with commercial tenants. We didn't address commercial tenants because it's not supposed to address commercial tenants. It's a narrow, simple, focused resolution to address an improper activity at our airport. It's that simple. And if you folks want that, then you should speak up about it, because quite frankly, if it doesn't pass tonight and it goes to December and something happens, God forbid, between every minute that we don't have something in place that qualifies. What is the problem of keeping our airport for our use? Why do we want the door open for non-Spruce Creek pilots to come in with unlimited use of our facilities? I just can't even imagine you would oppose this resolution.
I have one more question. Your resolution is prohibiting Eagle Sport Aviation Club from ground or air operations around Spruce Creek. what does that say to Eagle Sport Aviation Club, any of their members or their aircraft, or the need for them to come to Spruce Creek for maintenance, or for avionics work, or for a sandwich? If we preclude and prohibit them from even operating on our grounds, then what you're saying is that a commercial operator here cannot work for Eagle Sport Aviation Club in any capacity because they're not allowed to be here. And further, I would state that the POA unfortunately has no control over the airspace. We cannot control airspace above our facility. We certainly can't control what happens on the ground.
Paragraph 3 was designed to be an enforcement mechanism. We have a violator of our rules, covenants, and restrictions. We have a club that didn't even grace us with its presence at a board meeting. We have a club that did not produce its lease for review and approval as required. And so, yes, paragraph 3 says, because you violated, you're not allowed to be here anymore, in the sense that you cannot have use of our facilities. If you want a meaningless resolution with no teeth in it, then I suppose you could strike paragraph 3, so the people that had previously rented space in your hangar can come about as they wish.
Any other discussion? Anyone here? Joe?
I don't know whether it's further what is the order, but is there an adequate definition for what constitutes
Yes.
light of the
Yes, it's written in Exhibit A that John or Jack has there. Jack, can you read that for him?
I'll be happy to read it. As a matter of fact, these were definitions that were adopted by the POA back in 1991. It defines a member. It defines a tenant, means a person who rents or leases property at Spruce Creek from a member. It defines guests. It defines, most importantly, who's allowed to make an invitation. Someone laughing. Paragraph 2 speaks of invitations, which is really the key here, because you can have a legitimate tenant, like Eagle was, with a lease, but they're not allowed to then extend invitations to unlimited amount of members. Invitations, paragraph 2A says a member may use the airport, a member meaning a resident owner. A member may invite a guest to use the airport. A tenant may use the airport, but a tenant may not extend invitations to guests to use the airport. That's the crux. Unless, number 1, the right to extend the invitation to guests is specifically addressed or included in a written lease between the tenant and the landlord. That was not done by Eagle. Number 2, the written lease is approved in writing by the POA. That was not done. So, and it continues on. So it's very specific, Joe, and I thought that these had been distributed to you all. I sent them to AAC myself and asked that they be distributed. I hope that happened.
I'm just wondering whether somebody could run an Airbnb or hotel type operation on a day-to-day basis. But if every week has to be reviewed, it sort of slows things down. But I don't know whether that's being done.
Well, if you recall, back in April, I had drafted some regulations that to be attached as rules and regulations for residential leases. And the board liked the concept, but that is sitting somewhere in purgatory. I don't know where that is. Betsy?
I'm confused.
Okay.
I have a question. I'm confused. There's reference being made to CNRs and a reference being made to a resolution. So you're saying now that anytime the board makes any resolution, it goes on forever and ever and ever?
Until it's canceled or changed or amended.
And as part of our CNRs that transfer with our property?
Absolutely.
Well, where do we get a copy of all these CNRs that have been accumulating all this time?
That's a great question. It took us 20 hours to find this.
But does the Travolta issue not preclude this?
No, the Travolta issue confirms that all the CNRs previously adopted by the original founders back in 1976, they all roll into the next. I understand that in 74 or 76 that there was a transfer. Then there was another transfer to a new group. And then there was a final transfer to the POA. All of the transfers incorporate the rules and regulations from the predecessors in title, from the predecessors of ownership.
So in those 20 hours, where did you find this exhibit?
Shane found it in the minutes.
There
Was it recorded
Yeah?
at the county?
Well, yeah, was it?
Well, wait a second, now, that's a different issue, okay? Yes, all of the amendments to the bylaws and to our articles are all recorded, and we have them. There's 20 pages of them if you want.
That-
Every time there's an amendment to the articles, they're recorded.
Now, keep in mind, what Betsy's concerned about is that, and what I'm concerned about, is that there is no recording of this Exhibit A. Now, I understand that it was part of a rule or a regulation. Those are not recorded as CNRs. They are, what they are, as is listed as board decisions that are put in place as a function of what our CNRs say about what our obligation is. Now, in this particular case, if a board makes a rule, and they made this rule in '91, and nobody ever did it, nobody had ever gone to a commercial tenant and said, you have to sign a lease with me and get it approved by the board. It has never been done. Rules and regulations that come through boards are like that. Sometimes they just die when that board dies off. You get a new board, and now all of a sudden, whatever they had decided to do as a rule or a regulation becomes ignored. Because it's not a true amendment to our CNRs. If it was an amendment to the CNRs, it would have showed in the recording.
So you're saying that rules adopted by the board die with the board? Is that your opinion?
No, I'm not saying they die
Okay, so
with...
then this has never been amended or altered, so therefore it's still valid, and we're here today voting on a valid enforcement of previous undisputed rules and regulations. It's just that simple.
Yes,
But you're saying that anytime the board makes a resolution, it's necessarily part of the CNRs that continue on, but it is never recorded anyplace, or it's never affirmed or voted on by the community.
Well, you asked 4 different questions there.
Yeah.
All I can tell you is that this is still in existence today. If this board chooses to ignore it, it can ignore it. If the board chooses to amend it or alter it or veto it, I suppose it can, but there's no proposal before this board to do anything but enforce what's on the books. And I don't understand, quite frankly, why people have trouble with that.
We didn't know it was on the books.
Well, that's a different issue, right?
No, I guess, but I just understand.
Well, the lack of knowledge doesn't mean that something is not enforceable. People get in trouble with the law and regulations all the time.
Okay.
It becomes an issue of enforcement.
we do have an issue with, yes, I'll get to you in just a second. We do have an issue with the recording, not the recording in our CNRs, but the actual detailing of rules and regulations that are board designated, board decisions, in any kind of form that we can refer back to. Now, I've spoken to Randy about this, about trying to change that. We do have rules and regulations that you'll find in the front of your directory. We have rules and regulations that are policy set at the POA office. If you go in there and you haven't filled out the form in the right way, they're going to tell you the policy is you have to fill it out this particular way. The intent here is to capture a lot of these things, and just like Jack says, this one from 1991 is to capture this stuff, not as an amendment to our declarations, but as a rule and regulation that has not been reversed by another board. That's the whole point here. Now, we're suffering under the idea that a board made this rule or this regulation and this policy without any knowledge that going beyond that board, this would be put in place and be effective for subsequent boards. So, inasmuch as we haven't done it for the 27 or 29 years or whatever it's been, now we have commercial residents or commercial operators, non-resident operators in Spruce Creek, working on a lease that has not been approved by the POA per this document. And so we're going to end up then having to go to those individuals and say, we need to formally approve your lease. I think that's problematic. I believe the document from '91 has a lot of merit. I think we should adopt some of the measures in that document. If we strike from the resolution, paragraph 3 and 4, and we retain paragraphs 1 and 2, with the stipulation that the document from 1991 is rewritten to incorporate the elements that don't exist there now, capture it as a rule and a regulation that we record for subsequent boards to enforce, then I think we have a working model here. But if we're going to try to vote on this particular issue as it is written right now, I think it's going to be a problem. You had a comment to make, Keith?
Get Jeff on your
Folks, Keith Phillips is the name. I've been here a long time. I know most of you. When I first arrived here, there's an elder gentleman that was a developer. He's now deceased, so I won't use his name, but he was a clever lad, and he said, I'm going to tell you, Keith, he said, if you're going to have a private airport and you're going to have 100 commercial properties on it, you're due for a train wreck. Guess what? We're having one of those train wrecks. Let me just put this problem in very simplistic fighter pilot vernacular so you'll understand the problem. This seems to be a very complex legal problem that they're developing right now. But you got two problems. You're inviting people in, unlike to eat or unlike to come to the maintenance place and so forth. They're coming in to partake of the flying club activities. That doesn't mean just to fly the airplane. That means that a kid can come in and hang around all day long. He can come down to my hangar, he can go to your hangar, he can do whatever he wants to, or he thinks he can do that. So you've got an increased number of guests, and you're not really sure who invited them. Who is responsible? One thing about CNR, it says you're responsible for your guests. So who's responsible for them? So that's an issue. Now, the big issue is on the flying side. You're increasing your sortie rate significantly with the flying club. We already have a high sortie rate. In addition to increasing your sortie rate, you have an airplane like a pit special. If you know about pit specials, you know that they have an excess amount of thrust, and when they take off, they make a lot of noise. They're capable. In some cases, you've probably seen me fly mine going vertical, and you probably have been saying, that guy's a hot dog and he shouldn't be doing that. But I live here, you have to put up with me. Now, you don't have to put up with those guys. So fundamentally, we're doing two things. We're inviting people in here that we really don't have control over. We're increasing our sortie rate. Therefore, we're increasing our exposure. And they're not making any payments, so we got everything to lose, nothing to gain.
Very good. Thank you, Chief.
I'm going to also agree with Paul on one thing. If we can remove the sections 3 and 4, which concern this Eagle Sport Club, and continue on without those two and deal with those in another manner at a future time, I think this would go a lot smoother. And Jeff has got some commentary online.
I would also say...
Can you guys hear me?
No, you go ahead, Jeff.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Can you guys hear me okay?
We got you.
We can always hear you.
Okay. Okay, you can always hear me. Hey, listen, I agree with everything that's been said on 3 and 4, and as far as getting rid of it, and I think we ought to table this thing until you take the current resolution back to the